A recent leak at Android Authority basically makes it clear that OnePlus has a new device on its way. However, in taking a look at that leak, we also wanted to reminisce on their first attempt. Hey, it's Joshua Vergara. What's going on, everybody? And this is a look back at the OnePlus One, just kind of looking at its release cycle and also remembering how this phone provided a lot of great features and specifications for a price that was pretty accessible to everybody. But in doing so, we're also going to ponder why our smartphones this year are incredibly expensive. I still remember the original announcement event. There was a ton of buzz around it, mainly because of OnePlus's great guerrilla marketing. Now, it wasn't without its problems, but ultimately a ton of eyeballs were on OnePlus when their announcement happened. And I was one of the only members of the American media that was there, so I felt pretty privileged to be a part of what could have been smartphone history. Now, we wouldn't really go as far to say that OnePlus completely changed the smartphone world, and of course OnePlus is still around making premium devices that have won some accolades at Android Authority. But at the time, the OnePlus One definitely disrupted what was the flagship space that year. I mean, just take a look at the specifications. We have the Snapdragon 801, which was the main processor at the time. We have 16 and then 64 gigabytes of onboard storage as one of the main options, and then an update to 3 gigabytes of RAM over the 2 that was found in a lot of phones that year. And all of this came on a phone that actually looked different. Granted, I do have the bamboo version here. I changed the shell from the baby skin white, which is still kind of a weird name for a material on a device, but there was the baby skin white, the sandstone black, and then of course this bamboo one, which of course I would want to have the bamboo backing. So the phone was different, but still provided everything that users would basically need, including a version of Android that was reliable and also pretty much stock-like for all those people who were Android purists. But one of the reasons why we wanted to bring up the OnePlus One is because while we're looking back, we also realized that this kind of device hasn't happened since 2015. But we might be in line over the next year or so for a device that actually disrupts the space the way the OnePlus One did. And that's because the prices just seem to be rising and rising and rising. Plenty of other phones are still about $600 or more, and it seems like in the flagship game, you have to pay a lot or else you're going to have to settle for a mid-range phone. I'm going to point you to a couple of articles over at AndroidAuthority.com that talk about this phenomenon of super expensive flagship smartphones. Scott Gordon's article over at Android Authority basically states that a study found a 7% increase in the average smartphone sale price. Now, that's average smartphone. That doesn't just include the flagships, it includes every tier below it as well. And 7% might not sound like a whole lot, but remember that $1,000 is getting closer and closer to being the norm when it comes to flagship prices. And then there's Robert Trigg's article basically stating that there's a dichotomy between innovation and commoditization. Yes, these smartphone manufacturers are constantly trying to find the bleeding edge features to put in their phones. But until then, we still get rising costs, which basically tell the consumer that they are paying for the premium, even if, when you dive deep in there actually isn't a whole lot differentiating many of these smartphones from one another. We're at the point now that a phone that hits the 18:9 aspect ratio, the Snapdragon 835, maybe 4+ gigabytes of RAM and good storage options, that hits the $600 price point might actually be one of the best things we've seen all year. And according to the leaks, the next OnePlus device might just be able to hit that mark. But it's still $600 when we don't have too many great smartphones that hit a decent price point of $350 or less. And that's exactly what the OnePlus One did at its time. Those prices were $299 for the 16GB model and $349 for the 64GB model. And let's not even forget the time when it came down by even $50 more and you could get the original OnePlus One in the baby skin white for $249. Those prices are simply unheard of these days, and it kind of sucks that we don't really have that in the smartphone mid-range game either. After all, Android One devices that have recently been announced are still going over the $300 price point, even though they're supposed to be phones that are incredibly minimalistic yet reliable. If you want a reliable smartphone, then you could still go to the mid-tier game, but even then, those aren't the specifications that a lot of people are actually clamoring for. There's nothing wrong with being hopeful that another OnePlus One will arrive to disrupt the flagship market, but as it stands right now, we're probably going to be seeing even more increases in flagship prices, and it's going to be a bummer every time you see that price at the end of the announcement events. And that's why we, and probably a lot of you out there, look back fondly at the OnePlus One. It was a phone that at its time was one of the most desired devices of the year, mainly because with its accessible price point, you still got the best and sometimes even better specifications than the rest. So as always, thank you guys very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this quick look back at the OnePlus One. But the main thing I wanted to do in bringing up this old device was to bring up the conversation. How do you feel about the prices of flagship phones these days? And let us know what your opinions are in the comments down below. Keep it tuned to Android Authority for all of the best, including discussions like we've had just now, and also a look at what might be the next OnePlus device. We don't really know when exactly it's going to be, but it feels like it's going to be pretty soon. Keep it tuned here for that and even more in the flagship, mid-range, and all the different games of the smartphone market. And remember to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because we are, of course, your source for all things Android.